I'm Joe Bev, and this is The Joe Bev Show. This time on The Joe Bev Show, Christopher Columbus discovers America, as seen through the eyes of the Marx brothers. Then it's Chapter 1 of Brute Ballingham, Private Detective, The Excruciating Hello, the Camp Kilmore Case. That's coming up on this edition of The Joe Bev Show. They of Genoa tell with a shrug how in the old days Cristofer Columbo, whom men called the Dreamer, left Dame Columbo to go in search of the land of his imagining. And the tale tells how on a twilight Thursday Columbo walked alone on the edge of a doubtful wood, and viewed many things not salutary to notice. And there came to him one who was as perversely tall as a certain unmentionable object, and bearded in a manner it is not convenient to describe. But Columbo set about that which the stranger said was necessary, and when he had finished, he drank the contents of the curious skull, as had been foretold on a certain All Saints' Day. Then it was that the stranger spoke, or rather honked. "Hey, what's that you say? You're a sorcerer. Hey, I should have known. And your name is Rusty. Hey, that's a nice hat. Say, I heard of this Rusty, the sorcerer. And while I do not criticize, yet I cannot agree entirely with your improper use of the pronoun whom. Oh, my dear sir, those two varies would be surely, oh, most surely, he mentioned in the conning tower. Hey, Rusty, you're right. You said it, boy. Hey, I alluded to the describing of a certain Adams, with whom you are doubtless familiar. And of course, my dear Rusty, I spoke only jesting, for I am Cristofer Columbo, whom the men call the Dreamer, and I go in search of the land of my imagining. And it is truly a pleasure to meet the greatest sorcerer since Merlin. And how is the dear Mrs. Rusty? Then the sorcerer showed Columbo what was written on the insecure parchment. It frightened Columbo a little, but he assented. And when the sorcerer took off his silk top hat and pulled out a gold watch, he caused the skies to darken, and Columbo saw that which men refused to believe. Oh boy, now that's really clever, sir. That is indeed really clever. And I do wish that the children were here to see it. Would you mind doing that egg trick again? Then Rusty showed Columbo that he had nothing up either sleeve, and after an interval he consented to teach Columbo the secret of his conjuring. Why now, to be sure, that is indeed quite simple. But I am sorry I broke those 4 eggs by mistake in your silk hat. And while I do not wish to appear oversensitive, do you not think, my dear Rusty, that the trick would go just as well without those terrible jokes about the married life? What's that, you honk? Oh, those jokes have been used by every conjurer since Merlin? Well, then perhaps without them, the trick wouldn't work. What's that? You never heard of it being done? And you found that in sorcery, the best results are obtained by doing the customary thing? That's what I'll do, which only goes to show that the sorcerer is somewhat akin to business. And now, And now that I think of it, I believe that the term wizard of industry is perhaps not entirely a misnomer. Thus it was that Columbo took leave of Thurston, and the tale tells on how Walburga's Eve he came to the court of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And as he entered, one met him who was not unpleasing to the eye, and she was weeping. And as it was somewhat dark, Columbo decided to comfort her. Now, dear Queen Isabella, that's all right. You're gonna be okay. That's okay, yes. And now, do tell me, my dear, why is it that you weep? For I am Columbo, whom the men call the dreamer, and I go in search of the land of my imagining. And I think that you have the most remarkably lovely eyes.
Monsieur, I weep because it is this evening that I am to entertain the ladies of our Progress Literary Club, and Donna Margarita, whom the men call the Spanish omelette, but who really, Monsieur, has a lovely voice. She was going to sing the rosary, and now she has a cold and cannot sing, and King Ferdinand is coming, and oh, Monsieur, what shall I do?
Why now, truly, Queen Isabella, in the Genoa, it was at the judgment of all the really musically intelligent ladies, except perhaps my wife, that I sing not an unpleasant baritone. While I do not know the song to which you refer, yet I have devoted the most of my life to the composition of a poem concerning the land of my imagining, which might be well sung, and besides that, I can do a most remarkable egg trick. So it was that Columbo became, for a short time, not undeservedly, the life of the Progress Literary Party. And the tale tells how, after a paper by Donna Viola Balboa on Spanish architecture then and now, Columbo sang to them the song of the land of Columbo's imagining. And poignantly beautiful was the song, for in it was the beauty of a poet's dream, and the internal loveliness of that vision which men have glimpsed in all ages, if ever so faintly. And when he had finished, the eyes of Columbo were wet with tears, for into this poem he had woven the dreams of his disillusionment. And somewhat ironical to Columbo was the applause of those fine ladies who did not at all understand.
Wise old Cristofer Columbo.
Now that's the prettiest song I ever heard,
Announced King Ferdinand.
And now do tell us, Columbo, how one may get to this land of your imagining, so that I may extend the borders of my most Catholic kingdom and spread the teachings of the true faith. For to bring the world under the blessed influence of my religion is my only purpose in life. And really now, is there as much gold there as you described? Ah, King Ferdinand, there is more gold than I can ever tell. And I see only too plainly how grievously you suffer to think that perhaps these people are living in ignorance of the true faith. And I could ask nothing better than that the King Ferdinand give me ships in which I may sail to the westward and come at last to the land of my imagining. This I would do in order that the blessed soldiers of King Ferdinand, who will follow me, may show to the inhabitants of my discovered land the grievous errors of their ways, and to bring it to them at last to the realization of the true faith, which has been so helpful to our own dear Spain, and our gracious sovereign Ferdinand.
And droll it was to Columbo to think what might possibly happen were King Ferdinand to take his dream seriously. Or were the king perhaps to be informed as to the true meaning of Columbo's subtleties?
Well, now, of course, to fit out such an expedition would require great expense, my dear Columbo. Great expense. And of course, you know, Columbo, that when investors can buy Inquisition 4 1/4 for 89, it would be extremely difficult to raise the money for such a speculative project. Oh, extremely difficult. And then you must consider the present depression. Tell me now, Columbo, how long do you think this depression will last? For I seek, above all things, a return to healthy normalcy.
Well, King, I tell you, truly, that would be most difficult to say. I note that Rodriguez Babson's last chart showed...
I wish this Babson and his charts would go to hell, for it was he who advised me to sell the Queen's silver holdings. And now what am I holding? Don't answer that. But it occurs to me, Columbo, that in connection with this land of gold scheme of yours, you mentioned something about sailing to the west. Now look here, Columbo, that would be a distinct disadvantage when it came to marketing the bonds, for as you must already know, one cannot sail to the west without encountering fierce and enormous monsters who swallow, I am told, whole ships at one gulp.
Yeah, and now as to that, you may be right, and I should not go so far as to say that you are wrong, but still at the same time, is there any gentleman in the audience who can lend me an egg and a silk hat?
And when the unmentionable egg and the doubtful silk hat had been produced, in a manner which is not convenient to mention, Columbo rolled up both his sleeves and spoke the magic speech, as he had learned it on a certain Thursday from the sorcerer Rusty.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have here a common household egg, which I shall now ask the ushers to pass around to you so that you may see for yourself that there is no wires or strings attached. And while this is being done, ladies and gentlemen, I wish that three of you would step up on the stage. Any three. Don't be bashful, girls. I won't hurt you. How about that couple over there? Would you kindly oblige me? Yes, you, the married couple. Oh, wait a minute, folks. No, I guess they aren't married either. They look too happy.
Very painful was it to Columbo to hear those horrible jokes coming out of his mouth. But Rusty had quoted the authority of all successful sorcerers, Merlin, and not for anything would Columbo have had his trick a failure.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to ask this lady and these two gentlemen if they would be so good as to see if they can take this little egg and to make it stand on one end without any support.
And very droll it was to see the unsuccessful attempts which the three made. Finally, Columbo said,
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to watch me closely. I put the silk hat on my head thus, and I take the egg in my right hand thus. And now, if this young lady would be kind enough to hold my left hand, I hope her best fella doesn't mind letting such a pretty girl hold my hand. It's a lucky my wife can't see me. Though a friend said to me the other day, he says, who was that lady I seen you with? And I said, that wasn't no lady, that was my wife. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I take this egg, and in order to make it stand upright, I tap one end gently, thus, against the table until the end is flattened. And then, presto, the egg, she stands upright. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you one and all for your kind attention. No applause, just throw money. And thank you, Rusty. That's nice.
Thus it was that Columbo impressed King Ferdinand and his court with his profound knowledge of geography. Next the tale tells how there came to Columbo on Michaelmas Eve one sent by Queen Isabella, and when Columbo had buckled on his sword, he followed the messenger through winding corridors and came at last to the chamber of the Queen. And as he knelt before her, it seemed to Columbo that never before had he seen such unforgettable beauty as shone in the eyes of Queen Isabella. Yes, truly, this was the loveliest girl that Columbo had ever imagined.
Now do rise, and you and I shall have a nice chat alone here together, Columbo, and you can tell me all about geography and such, which I am oh so frightfully ignorant. In truth, I have tried to get Ferdinand to instruct me, but I fear that, well, Ferdinand does not understand me.
So Columbo instructed Queen Isabella in the fundamentals of geography, and after a while he spoke.
Now, many people believe that the earth she's a flat. Such is not at all the case.
Then, after a long interval of silence, Columbo said,
There, my dear, do you not see how ridiculous it is to suppose that the earth is anything but round?
Why, surely, sire, you make it appear very round indeed. And I wonder that I have not thought of it before. And I think that geography is now the most fascinating subject. And oh, Monsieur Columbo, you must come back again and again and instruct me often.
Thus it was that Columbo became royal geographer, and the tale tells how after a while various whisperings came to King Ferdinand of his queen's curious enthusiasm for study.
Now, about this geography, I am, my dear, indeed glad to see you taking an interest in such an important study, and I have arranged to have your tutoring in the future done by Father Bernardino, who has had 52 years' experience at the university, and your lessons will commence tomorrow.
Oh, how can I ever thank you, dear Ferdinand, for your untiring interest in my welfare? For I have been struggling along in my studies of geography.
But King Ferdinand was an unusually efficient king, and he spared no pains in craving for normalcy. So it was that the next day he called to him the man who had chanced to be royal geographer before the coup de grace of Columbo.
Now tell me, is there any chance that a man who sails to the west will ever return? None, your majesty. Oh, for many have tried, and horrible are the tales which they tell of demons and the monsters lying in the wait for the ships of men. And I should say definitely, O king, that whoever sails to the westward will never return.
And the tale tells how that afternoon Columbo stood before King Ferdinand. And very strange to Columbo was the enthusiasm which burned in the king's otherwise somewhat fish-like eyes.
For you know, Columbo, that God has spoken to me and commanded me to save from the fires of hell the inhabitants of those golden lands of which you sang. And to you, my dear Columbo, is to be given the chance which you so ardently desire. For I have this day purchased 3 ships, which await your command, and within a week you should be well on your way on this glorious mission for God and for Spain. And I might add that the Queen, too, is much interested in this voyage, and has even been persuaded to dispose of her jewels in order that you may make haste. Such instant obedience to the will of God, and such a fine enthusiasm to further his kingdom on earth, it does your majesty a great credit. And I shall indeed congratulate the inhabitants of this to be discovered land for their good fortune in obtaining such a devout king.
And the tale tells how that night Columbo took leave of Queen Isabella.
No, don't weep. Do not weep, oh poor Queenie. No, for I am only Columbo, whom the men call the dreamer, and I go in search of the land of my imagining, and perhaps I shall return,
But they tell how Queen Isabella refused to be comforted for many and many a day, and unexplainedly curious to Father Bernardino was his absolute and complete failure as a royal instructor in geography, for Father Bernardino had taught for 52 years at the university. And so it was that Columbo sat alone in the cabin of the ship which carried him towards the land of his imagining, And strange and somewhat fearsome it was to the sailors to see their captain sitting thus motionless night after night, for already had they left the Canaries far behind. And some there were who said that a madman commanded their ship, and others who whispered of horrible monsters in those western seas. And the tale tells how one night Columbo observed across his table one who had not been sitting there before, and whose hair was strangely red.
Well now, truly, sir, this is very curious, for I do not remember seeing you amongst the crew, nor were you ever at the court. And on the whole, your red hair and your sneering grin interrupt my dreams, and the dreams are all that I have left. For you know, sir, that on this earth, man has been able to endure only by playing the ape to his dreams. And in every generation, there has been those who dream of a beautiful thing, and in every age there has been those who caught some glimpse of that perfect beauty which the Greeks call Helen. And to have seen Helen is to have been touched with the divine and unbearable madness.
And it became strangely quiet in the cabin as Columbo continued.
And those authors who wrote perfectly of the beautiful dreams will perchance endure, and those who saw only a man as they are will perish. For so has been in the past, and so it will be in the future. All of which is a rather tiresome and pedantic excuse for the fact that I am about to read to you my own poem.
And Columbo read to the stranger the dream of the land of Columbo's imagining, and when he had finished, the stranger smiled and shook his head sadly.
Come now, do not, I pray, pretend to like it unless you really do. Of course it is not at all the kind of thing that will sell, is it? And the meter must be patched up in places, don't you think? And some of the most beautiful passages would never be permitted by the censors. But still.
And Columbo paused hopefully, for it was Columbo's poem, and into it he had poured the heart of his life, and it seemed to him now more than ever a beautiful thing. The stranger handed Columbo a book, and Columbo read the book, and when he had finished, his face was gray, as are old ashes in ancient urns. And about the mouth of him, whom men call the dreamer, were curious hard lines.
Now by heaven you lie!
Columbo brandished his sword.
You lie, and your gopher prairie, she's a lie. And you are all contemptible, you who dip your pens in the tracing ink and seek to banish beautiful dreams from the world.
But the red-headed stranger had vanished, and Columbo found that he was alone, and to Columbo the world seemed cheerless, and as a place that none have lived in for a long time.
Now this is curious, for I have evidently been dreaming, and a more horrible dream I have never had, and I think that while all this certainly did not actually take place, yet that grinning redhead has upset me horribly, and on the whole, I believe that the safest course would be to put back at once for Spain. For certainly, I have no desire to take the remotest chance of discovering anything which may in the least resemble that gopher prairie.
And the tale tells that as Columbo started for the deck in order that he might give the signal for the return to Spain, there came across the water from one of the other ships the faint cry of a sailor, and the sailor was waving his hat and shouting,
Land ho!
Thus it was that Cristofer Columbo became the discoverer of the land of his imagining, and as he stood on the deck, Columbo mused.
Now, this is a sorrowful jest, and a very unfair jest that has happened. For I, who have dreamed a beautiful dream of the land of my imagining, will quite probably henceforth be known only as the discoverer of what will turn out to be merely one more hideous and stupid country.
And tears came to the eyes of Columbo, for on the waves behind him floated the torn and scattered pages of the poem, which sang the imagined vision of beauty of him whom men long and long ago called the dreamer. Thus it was in the old days.
Cristofer Columbo, A Comedy of Errors, as interpreted by the Marx Brothers. This is Joe Bev. Coming up on the Joe Bev Show, Bert Ballingham, Private Detective, The Excruciating Hello, Chapter 1, The Camp Kilmore Case. That's coming up on the Joe Bev Show.